Hi, everyone. This is Samantha Varner from ProSymmetry. Thank you so much for joining us today as we kick off our weekly webinar series for Tempus functionality. We're really excited to get back into this and deliver this content to you. We're going to give it about another minute before we get started here to let people log on, and then we'll be good to go. So I'll come back on in just a minute. All right, looks like we have a majority of everyone here today, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, welcome to our second round of Tempus functionality webinars. We're really excited to kick this back off and to teach you all and show you all the different functionalities of Tempus. So today, Sean will be giving the presentation on our project schedule feature. This is newer, just so everyone knows, we delivered this in 5.0 and then further enhanced it in 5.1. So we definitely wanted to make sure everyone is well educated on how to use this great feature. And yeah, I think we should get started. Sean, you do have presenting rights, so I'm not sure if you were able to share your screen yet.
Yep, I'm going to do that right now. And Samantha,
Awesome.
Let me know when you're able to see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining. This is Sean. I'll be walking you through the project scheduling functionality in Tempus. So if you're familiar, the scheduling feature first dropped as a beta feature in version 5.0. But the beta flag was removed and a number of stability enhancements, improvements were addressed and added starting in version 5.1. So that's what I'll be showing you today. There's lots of plans for this capability going forward with 5.2, 5.3, and beyond. So you'll see it in more places with more capabilities, as you'd see obviously with each new release of Tempus. Now, strategically, just to give you some ideas behind the scenes of the product team's ambitions with this feature, it's really to accommodate the growth of the product. So we have customers now all over the world for quite some time, but they continue to grow in scale. And many of them are either removing PPM tools or using Tempus in a PPM capacity. Others have sort of offline Microsoft Project or other scheduling tools that they want to bring into Tempus directly. And they prefer users work directly in the system to leverage Tempus resource pool, Tempus reporting, what if analysis, timesheeting, and of course all the other great features that you're probably pretty aware of already. So it's not a strategic change in the product by any stretch. It's really to accommodate the growth and the user types we have. And the reality is many of our customers needing this type of detailed scheduling function for certain areas of their business to fully come on board to Tempus. We also see some scenarios where customers are in much more complex type of business processes, starting with a demand data set, transitioning to an allocation data set, and ultimately when they get to the stage of performing the actual project, the execution stage, looking to then use a fully networked project schedule. So we also see very elaborate, sophisticated processes that pull together all of the data sets that we make available in Tempus. So lots of use cases. Obviously, no there's nothing forcing you to use this, but it certainly would give you additional capabilities which are turned on in your environments. If not, contact us, contact Samantha and her team to get you the appropriate licensing file if needed. Okay, so before I actually take you into the scheduling feature itself, I do want to make you aware of some of the requirements around security. Now, those are managed under admin settings, of course, and you're going to find the specific settings needed underneath role management. Now, role management obviously has global roles, which we can have one-to-one with users, and it gives you the sort of high-level entitlements across the system. But then if you remember, we also have project roles and resource roles. These are designed for those access policies where we can create much more elaborate types of relationships between users and information assets in the system, whether they're projects or resources, obviously inferred by the titles here. So if we browse to project roles, you'll notice a new option here, actually started in 5.0, but we have the access schedule data set, all right? Now, obviously the three roles, project roles that are built in, manager, editor, viewer, have various settings here, but let's create a new setting or a new role. We'll say this is our project manager role, all right? And then we can say underneath the project access, access schedule data set option, three different options. There's none. Obviously, the user wouldn't see the schedule tab in the project options. They wouldn't access it or have any rights to see it or interact. We also have the edit, which gives you access to the link and the ability to create, update, delete, scheduling items. And then, of course, view, which would give the user read-only access. So this, again, would have to be configured to grant certain users access to the scheduling functionality. But again, remember, these are project roles that then have to be tied into access policies. This can, depending upon your security configuration, could be a 30-second update or maybe a couple minutes, depending upon how many access policies you have and how many roles you have defined. So it's still pretty simple to put in place, all right? Okay, so that's the one sort of predecessor to getting this in place. So now underneath project management, if we pick on any particular project, how about Laguna Phase 4, the scheduling function exists underneath your project options. So in the very top right corner, this little icon with the three little dots that illuminates when clicked or hovered over. And this drop-down list will now include, second from the bottom, depending upon your access policies, this assumes you have access to everything, you'll see the scheduling option, which the icon, shows a series of tasks with a, looks like a start-to-start dependency, and it's called schedule. All right, so if you have access to this, you have at least view rights, potentially view and or edit. When we click on it, it'll take us into the schedule itself. Again, your ability to check out the schedule for editing will be driven based off of that project role. If you have edit rights, you will have this option here to check out and manipulate. If you do not, if it's a view only, you will not have the checkout schedule option. Instead, you still will be able to interact with the schedule. You won't be able to add, update, delete items. You will, however, have options like inserting various columns from a reporting standpoint. You will have options, I believe, also have the ability to view quickly the critical path, which is available here to illuminate the critical path inside of a project. And of course, also zoom in and zoom out options. All right, we'll walk through all of these in detail when we create a new schedule. So again, depending upon your security, you'll be able to see different things and interact with different things. But of course, the checkout option will exist if you have rights to edit. Checkout is important. So unlike, for example, BPA flat grid, scheduling does not enable concurrent editing at the moment. There are future plans for a BPA style scheduling interface where multiple schedules can be manipulated concurrently. That's a ways out, but definitely something we're envisioning and looking at to fit with our broader philosophy of enabling bulk editing of data. Right? So something to look forward to. But checkout does occur, and again, it does lock the data from being edited by other users concurrently. So you would have to check out to edit and then check back in to persist your changes. All right, so let's, for the sake of full disclosure, why don't we start a new project, and we'll start sort of from the ground up. So let's say we'll create a new project called new project, oops, can't spell, webinar scheduling. Okay, so we'll go ahead and create this. Now, once this is created, I will immediately have access to all of those project sub-options that you're expecting to see along with schedule. Now, scheduling does not require that a demand data set or an allocation data set exists. It does not require that a team exists. So if you are familiar with using the build team function to limit the resources available for use inside of your allocation or demand data set, it's not required, but it can function. So if you did want to use the same build team capability to limit which resources are available for assignment inside your schedule, that does hold. So you can leverage build team if you wish, but it's not required. So when you first browse to the scheduling feature, and also notice the beta, little beta icon has been removed, all right? So when you first browse to the scheduling feature, it'll be empty, all right? So this is completely empty, there's nothing in here. You'll notice it's checked in, all right? There's no records to display. But then the first thing to notice beyond that would be there is essentially two separate panels inside the scheduling function. So it's very much a task-oriented view. The left side would be your task table. So those of you familiar with desktop scheduling tools, it'd be pretty straightforward stuff. So there's a splitter bar along the center, so we can view more of the task table if we drag to the right, less of the task table if we move to the left. So the left side will contain our task table. The right side will contain our Gantt chart. So a conventional Gantt style interface off to the right. The default time frame will be weekly with the by day display. You'll also find inside this Gantt chart a little today indicator to tell us what the current date is. So you can scroll around and find, again, the current date. There are also options to zoom in and zoom out. Now, we do currently support 3 different levels of zoom. So you're able to go from by day to, I believe, a week, and then a monthly roll-up, and we'll test this out as we build out our schedule. All right, now to actually interact with this and actually create items or tasks and create assignments and modify the scheduling information, we have to use this checkout schedule option. Now, when I click out checkout schedule, this will put this into edit mode. Notice now the task table illuminates a enter task name display. You'll also notice the release option becomes available. Release is not as in software release. This means release your lock. It allows you to basically perform a mass undo, right? Also notice the Gantt chart itself, the little today icon begins giving us more of a line indicator to show us the roll up. Okay, so now creating new tasks can be done a few different ways. I should also note that you can now import as well into the schedule. So if you had offline, let's say Microsoft project files, you can import those into a project, not as the project's allocation or demand data, that's always been there, but you can do it to inject your schedule into an existing project. So you're sort of merging the schedule into a project in Tempus. It's done administratively through the data synchronization tile. We can take a look at that a little bit later. Creating new tasks, pretty straightforward. We can click in the task table itself. You'll notice that color coding, that sort of orangish, yellowish color indicates the cell that is active. You'll also notice when we have multiple records here, I can do a multi-selection by using the Shift key plus the up-down arrows or left-right arrows, depending upon how you prefer manipulating your task table. So you can use just your keyboard to move around, or of course you can use your mouse as well. So we can type new items in here. There's also this little plus icon, which gives us an ability to add new tasks, right? So this does it a bit more in a bit more elaborate fashion. This gives us a task information dialog box from which I can fill out a range of additional attributes or task attributes just to get started. Things like duration, start and end date, percentage completedness. There's predecessor data as well as resource information. But for the time being, I'm gonna skip this and show you the way that I use it, and I think the way that most of you will as well, which is simply to click in the cell itself and then to start typing. So in this case, I'm going to start with a really basic example that I'm giving now, as well as when I work for another very, very large organization in the space that all of you would know. They make a really popular desktop scheduling tool set. So let's go ahead and just create a summary task. So I'm going to enter summary. All right, now notice immediately after I enter this and I just hit the enter key on my keyboard, it takes me to the next line. Again, you'll notice the system creates an ID. These are just going to be in sequence, as you would find, again, conventionally in other desktop scheduling tools. It'll define a default 1-day duration, as well as the current starting date of this. Essentially, in this case, the created on date for this particular project, right? Again, we can adjust the splitter bar, we can insert columns, we'll do more of that in a moment. What I'll do next, again, is I'm gonna create some subtasks. So summary tasks are not necessary. For those of you that have or haven't used critical path style scheduling tools, it's really up to you. Summary tasks really are just that. They are designed to represent a roll-up of the subtasks or even sub-summary tasks that sit beneath them. And Tempus fully supports multiple levels of a hierarchy. So we can start at a summary, we can have a sub-summary, multiple levels of sub-summary. You can have a dozen or more levels of indentation. There's really no predefined limit on levels of indentation. Right. So in this case, let's just go, how about task 1? And I'll do like task 1 through task 5. Task 1, 2, 3, task 4, and then task 5. And I'm just using my keyboard right now. So I've typed this in, I hit the enter key, click next. Notice the IDs are updating. The durations, the dates, all pretty much remain the same because right now each one's an independent task. There's no relationship between them, either through indentation or through any type of precedence relationship. So there's no start to start, finish to finish, finish to start type of dependencies yet. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, so we support obviously summary tasks and subtasks, and the way you can create those relationships, you could do this through the WBS, you could do it through the task information dialog box. My preferred method is to use the menu directly above the task table, so right up top here. The two that I'll refer to at this point would be the indent and outdent options. What those do, again, is basically just take anything beneath a particular task, whether we've selected one task or multiple, and it will indent those beneath, immediately creating, whether we name it summary or not, immediately creating a summary task relationship. So what I'm going to do in this case is just use my keyboard. That's my preference, but I'll show you how to do this as well with the mouse, is to hit the shift key and the down arrow. And notice at this point, it's selecting multiple tasks, all right? So I could have dragged here to select these. What I've done in this case is I've selected the shift key and the down arrow. And again, our color coding shows us that these 5 tasks are now selected. So next, I can use the indent option here. Notice a little hover over to show us that particular icon's purpose. We'll click indent. And now, of course, a few things happen. Number 1, you'll notice these tasks now sit beneath summary, so they've been indented physically. You'll also notice the summary task now has an expand collapse icon directly to its left. And you'll also notice the icons used inside the Gantt itself have also changed. So our summary style indicator, which is a very common summary looking indicator, this little sort of block icon versus our bar icons for tasks, has now been updated inside the Gantt as well. All right, so very simple to create those relationships. Again, the system does support multiple levels here. So if I wanted to make tasks 4 and 5 subordinate to task 3, we can also create that hierarchy here as well. So notice now I've created task 4 and 5 as subtasks of task 3. Now in this case, I'll back out of that change. In this case, I'll use the outdent function to move these out. So basically the opposite action, the opposite to indent is the outdent. So we'll switch those back. All right, so tasks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are lined up nicely. And again, system supports summary, sub-summary, multiple sub-summary type relationships. Okay, now another type of task you can create beyond a summary and a traditional task is also a milestone. Now these are different from the milestones that we have in Tempus already. Our existing milestone functionality is really just a loose floating object that can be used to indicate specific timing inside of the single project allocation grid, the bulk project allocation grid, and the bulk project allocation flat grid. Milestones here are the conventional scheduling milestones. They're an epoch or a moment in time where something should take place, maybe a go live, a decision, something used traditionally in conventional scheduling. So to do this, what I'll do is I'll type in milestone. All right, so there's my new milestone task. I'm going to indent this to align. And to make something a milestone, similar to other tools in the market, I'm just going to make the duration 0. So I enter a 0 and hit the enter key. And now notice we have all 3 types of Gantt iconography here, we have our summary, traditional task, and then a milestones. So now you can see all the various types that you're going to see inside of the Gantt chart. And this is how we create a milestone. The name can be really whatever you'd like. But what we would do to flag a task as a milestone is simply mark its duration as 0 days. All right, so we have indents, various tasks, task types, if you will, even though there's a separate type field that we'll come back to. And of course, duration of 0 to make this a milestone. All right. Now, the next thing I'd like to show, and it's certainly not a, the specific sequence you have to take. You can follow really whatever sequencing you'd like. But I do want to show how you would update durations. Now, we haven't assigned any resources yet. We're going to really make this more of a duration-driven planning interface or schedule. You can certainly change it to be driven by units of allocation, by work, or by duration. If you're familiar with the concept of a task type, in terms of what, how is the task maintained, how is the calculation performed against duration, work, and percentage allocation. There's a triangle that's usually displayed for explaining how that functions, where one side is fixed, another is changed, and the third is auto-calculated. That's driven by a field called task type. I'll circle back to that in a moment, but essentially the 3 variables that are used in that scheduling process are going to be duration, work, and then percentage, essentially percentage allocation of the resource or resources that are assigned to that particular task. All right, so that same type of functionality is maintained in Tempus as well. So again, it'll be a very familiar experience for those of you that have worked in those types of tools before. But in this case, what I'll do is update durations. And again, to do this, I can click in the cell, or what I do is just browse to the cell. So we'll say, in this case, task 1, ID 2, and I can just enter the number of days. Now, currently, the duration column is going to support days only. In the future, we may look to introduce different types of measure, different units of measure, but right now it's days only. So let's say this is going to be 5 days. So enter 5 and hit the enter key. And I would move with my keyboard with the up or down arrow to the next row and maybe say this is 4 days, again, 3 days, 2 days, and we'll keep as 1. All right. So setting durations, these could also be partial. We could have 2.5 days, 3.5, 4.25. So they can be fractional days as well if you wish. But again, entering duration is really simple. We pop in a number and then hit the enter key or just click away. All right, so updating durations, really simple to do. The same goes for start dates if you wish to do that. So you can click on these cells to modify the dates. And the last thing I'll show you before we move on to some things around some of those other task types, other features, is creating task relationships. So we've set and built our structure. So we have our summary, our milestones, our tasks. So the summary, again, is a roll-up of everything beneath it. Notice it's now matching the max of the durations for the tasks underneath it. And then we have a milestone that just represents a point in time. So now to create a dynamic schedule where these items are linked together, we have a few options inside of Tempus. One, we can use the task information dialog box. Another option we have, if we insert columns. So notice from any one of these columns, if you click the little icon to the far right, you'll find sorting options for any one of the columns, but then also an insert option, which lets you pull from a range of additional columns which are hidden by default. So I can insert another column here called predecessor. All right, and you'll see the predecessor column over here. So we can implement our dependencies by literally clicking in the predecessor column and selecting or entering the ID of the task, which would be the predecessor for this specific task. Now that's another mechanism. It's a very manual, laborious approach. The other option you have is to create dependencies or predecessor relationships by essentially selecting multiple tasks. So another option we have here is to, let's say, select series of tasks, multi-select. And you'll notice at the very top of the screen, we have a link icon and a break link icon or unlink. The link is going to create dependencies in the order of which the selections have been made. The unlink would essentially remove any type of linkage that is there. And for full disclosure, the types of links or dependencies we allow, we support start to start, meaning 2 tasks start at the same time, finish to finish, meaning 2 tasks or multiple tasks finish at the same time. And then we also support finish to start. That means 1 task finishes, the next can begin. That is going to be overwhelmingly the most popular one used. I know that from other systems used elsewhere and just globally. That's just the way most of these critical path scheduling systems get implemented, and it's the most normal. You'd expect the sequencing of activities, which is the benefit of using this type of scheduling function, and as a result, that's how most people plan. You complete one thing and move on to the next. So again, with multiple items selected, if I choose the link icon, you'll notice right away this now creates the dependency relationship between these activities. So these are now linked together. All right, so it's another option we have. Now a third option, I just drag this guy over all the way here, so it's a little bit clearer. You can also create linkages inside of the Gantt window itself. So you'll notice when you hover over any one of the Gantt bars, you'll notice a few different things pop up. One, there's a starting point, little O or circle, and an ending point, again, a little O or circle. There's also a little delta icon at the bottom. That can be used to update percentage completedness, but we'll come back to that. Now, to create a dependency inside of the Gantt chart itself, if you click on the very leading edge, let's say in this case, so as an example, I want to create a finish to start dependency between task 3 and task 4. So when task 3 finishes, task 4 can begin. To do that, if I click on the leading edge and now start to drag away, you'll notice this little dotted line or dashed line appears. I can now drag that to the beginning of another task that I want to link, get the little arrow to tell me it's good to go, and release my cursor. All right, so I can now manually create relationships between tasks by clicking and dragging from the leading edge or the trailing edge to the successor task, if you will. All right, that's another option we have. So pretty cool, nice and easy to use function here. Let's now grab the remaining tasks. Let's do 4, 5, and milestone, and we'll create our full critical path. Okay. Now that brings us to another point. This is a critical path scheduling tool set, which means it's going to automatically calculate start and end dates, but it's also going to calculate any slack, meaning how much can tasks shift or move without impacting the calculated or currently calculated finish date of the project, hence the critical path mode. It does a forward and backward pass, the conventional stuff you'd find in the CPM algorithm, and that is built in as well. And while we don't have as many of those columns exposed, they're just based on voice of customer feedback, not as widely used. We do have, however, a critical path indicator. Now, in this case, it's going to be pretty clear what that critical path looks like, since we have one series of tasks without any additional sub-summaries and additional paths or nodes in the schedule. But in any case, to illuminate your critical path, there is a critical path icon, again, directly above the task table, right? So you can see here this little sort of like a heartbeat type of indicator. And when we click on this, it'll illuminate those tasks which are part of the critical path, meaning those tasks whose date cannot change without altering the end date of the project. And now you see those illuminated in red, the commonly used color coding when displaying a critical path in a CPM generated schedule. So you can now see we can illuminate the critical path inside of the Gantt chart, right? That's another feature available to us. While we're here as well, I'll quickly show you that, again, we have this expand and collapse functionality. So inside of your schedule, right now there's only about 7 lines. It's pretty manageable and simple, but you could certainly have tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands, it's up to you. So we would fully support a collapse and expand function throughout this feature set. And you'll notice that exists here at any summary level, but you'll also notice the menu includes an expand all and a collapse all function inside of this menu. So if you wanted to do a collapse all, that's available here, and expand all available here as well. And again, also to wrap things up with regards to the menu options, and I promised we would come back to it, you'll notice the zoom in and zoom out. So currently we're seeing the weeks at the daily level. So there's no additional zoom in option. You start at the most granular level, but in terms of zoom out, we can go from this weekday pairing up to essentially weeks. Well, this is a roll up, I guess, by every other week or week. Yep. And then one more, which should be by month, right? So this is a pretty simple one in this particular case, but again, we can get, again, start at a very granular level or back out and go to a much, much higher level. Okay. Now, once you've made these changes, and I'm gonna come back in and do lots more stuff here, but once you've created the schedule and you're ready to save, you can take either approach of saving and checking in, and that would persist all of your changes. The other is to hit the release, and release at this point is going to be a cumulative stack of the changes made during the session. So in this case, the release is basically going to drop all those changes and take us back. All right. In this other case, I'll hit save and check in to persist. Okay. All right. Now, it looks like there was one question on, and I'll address this one quickly, of why certain columns weren't updating. So at the moment, there are certain actions that will update this section. There's others that do require a post back or a communication back to the server. So those are certain things that are being updated. So for example, there are certain calcs that do still go back to the server. So if you saw, well, why did you see 4 finish the start for the 1, but the others weren't updated? Again, it had to do with that post back option, which is something we're working on from a performance standpoint. So it's not constantly calling the server to get some of those calculations and certain updates. And those are, again, certain things you'll see improved and updated as we continue to deploy newer capabilities with the scheduling function. Right? And you'll see that in a few other areas where there's certain heavier calculations that we're working to simplify on sort of the ongoing communications between the client side and the server side, at least in this case from the browser to the server. Okay, so this is check back in. To modify the schedule again, we would simply hit the checkout schedule option. This will put us back into edit mode. Now, a few additional things I will bring up. So inside of the task table, again, we have these various columns. So those that aren't currently inserted, there's work, and work can be set, but it's really driven by any assigned resource. So if you're going to use this for resource management, you can pop resources in this way. Again, the reason we started with, and Tempus has always been about those forecasting grids, is that's how almost every client we work with is doing it, and they're doing it in Excel, which is why Tempus has been so successful in moving clients away from Excel into Tempus. And these PPM tools, while you can certainly schedule at the task level, obviously it makes it much, much more challenging to conduct any type of real resource management. These, generally speaking, are not interfaces used widely outside of the PM community. So these types of things aren't going to be used by resource managers, not going to be used by folks in those types of roles. And as a result, this interface, we don't expect to be used as heavily for the day-to-day resource management. We still expect the conventional resource forecasting and capacity planning interfaces that are part of Tempus will only grow, frankly, in their importance. But you still can assign resources here and also calculate or modify the work values. We also have task type, WBS, percentage complete, resources, and also an effort-driven staffing function, if you're familiar, which affects how essentially duration and work get calculated in the event of multiple resources being assigned. So let's, in this case, bring in the task type. And this is something I mentioned earlier. So for each task, you're going to find various options here for scheduling. And we have 3 different options that are used in this calculation. Obviously, units, or the percentage allocation, the duration, and the work. Right now, and by default, your assignments are all going to be fixed duration. The other options you have, however, are fixed work, fixed units, and of course, a fixed duration. Now we have separate documentation that we have available in now our Zendesk portal, or we can send separately, that would show you the full series of calculations, meaning if I fixed one of these and I change another variable, which one is calculated. Outside of a few odd cases where you set one but then also modify it and so on, which you'd see in the documentation, the resulting calculations are pretty straightforward. If I'm fixing work and I'm changing duration, the units are adjusted. And that still holds very tightly inside of the scheduling functionality. But you do, again, have access to these 3 different task types, which you're free to modify on your own at any subtask level. So this is not going to be something we would tweak at a summary level. That would be auto-calculated for you. You're not going to change the values and have them roll down. They're always going to roll up to a summary. Hence, my task type would not be modified there. All right, so task types are fully available. Now, in addition to modifying inside of this grid, you can also perform modifications using the task information dialog box. And you can access that, and you'll notice the far left here, each one of these tasks has a little icon that illuminates like our project options menu that highlights when selected, or highlighted, I should say. And when you click on it, you'll see some sub-options. You'll see things like task details, new task, outdent, delete, and scroll to. Now I'll talk about these briefly before we go into the task information dialog box. Task details, that's what I call the task information dialog box. It's going to take us to a little modal window from which we can access data around predecessors, resources, and also around the generic task information. New task lets us essentially insert tasks above, below, or as a subtask to the currently highlighted task. So you can use this to quickly insert new tasks. Outdent would allow us to perform that action that we have here from the menu, except at this particular level. Delete, exactly as its name indicates, this would delete that particular task. And then the scroll to. Now, scroll to is really a design function that allows you to snap to or find horizontally where tasks are. So if you've scrolled to 2 years in the future, but this task is happening today, and you want to get back to it, you could certainly scroll horizontally here. This option, however, says snap to this particular task inside of the Gantt chart, so I can see it without having to scroll. Right. So where I want to take you now is to the task information dialog box, and to get there, we would select this task details option, and that's going to launch a modal window. And this modal window will give us many of those same features, but condensed into a modal window, and this is really just based on your preference, frankly, of how you like to work. You can certainly delete a task from here, save and cancel, 3 different tabs, general tab, predecessor tab, and a resource tab. The general tab allows me to modify the task, view the ID, alter duration, alter work, modify start dates, view the WBS value, change the task type, set the effort-driven value, view or modify the finish date. And then you'll also see this option to change the percentage completedness, which is something we can also do in the task table or inside of the actual Gantt chart itself. Beyond this, there's a predecessors tab. All right, now in this case, we're on task 1, so there's no predecessor. There we go. But if it did have predecessors, you'd see those here. In fact, I'm going to open another one in a moment, because not only can we see the ID, the task name, the task type, but we also have an option to modify, define any lead or lag time. So if you wanted to show a task overlap, you could enter a negative value here. Whereas if you wanted to show a gap between tasks based on a dependency, you could insert a positive value here. And you could also view this or use this to create or remove tasks, dependencies. So if I wanted to build multiple dependencies here, I could do that very easily. And then lastly, there's a resource tab. Now the resource tab would give us an option, if we click add, to insert additional resources or add new resources here. And notice right now this has access to all the same resources I have access to inside of my SPA or VPA interfaces, because I can see and view everything. And also because I'm not using the build team. If I was using the build team, this list would be collapsed to only those resources who have been made available for assignment. Right? So in this case, why don't we choose, how about Nathan Brown? The allocation units here are going to be 100, and we'll go ahead and add Nathan. We can also add multiple resources if we wish. How about Leah? And we'll add Leah at a lower level, how about 25%? And then we'd hit save. All right, so those are the 3 tabs. When you go ahead and hit save here, you'll notice in this case, Nathan and Leah are now allocated. This is another method you can use. So beyond just assigning through the task information dialog box, you could also do this through the resource column. So from the resource column, I can insert 1 or multiple resources. It's using the task information dialog box where I can do more granular work, where, for example, I assigned Leah at 25%, which we can see directly, for example, here or in the task information dialog box. But inside this grid view, again, you can see who is assigned. We can also do it directly from a pick list. So from here, I could choose maybe, how about an inspector? And then maybe for the next task, we'll assign a technology manager. Right? So I can do single resource assignment or multi-resource assignment from inside of the task information dialog box or from the task table itself. And those names also illuminate directly to the right of any one of those bars inside of the Gantt window. Right. Now the last place I'll take you to, and as I mentioned a moment ago, is if we take any one of these tasks that has a predecessor, let's say, so we'll go to task information dialog box, and we go to the predecessor column or tab, you'll now see we have, again, in this case, because it does have an existing predecessor, the ID of the predecessor, the name of that task, the type of dependency, which is where I could also modify that dependency type. And this is also where I could input a lead or lag value. So if I wanted something like, we want a 3-day gap between these two, I'd enter 3, hit save, and now you can see there's a 3-day gap between when one finishes and the other starts. That gives you another option. All right. I think I did say that was the last thing, but I do want to show a few more things now that I've thought about it. So in terms of updating things like percentage completedness, like how much are we done in any particular activity, there's a few ways that can be done. I did mention, and I do like this feature a lot, I think it's pretty cool, is inside of the Gantt chart itself, I can select this little delta icon underneath the task bar. And if I drag this forward, you'll get a little pop-up telling us the percentage completedness, the progress, and we'll release our cursor, and now you'll see that draw inside of the Gantt chart itself. All right, so that's one option you have. Another option you have is to insert the percentage complete column inside of the task table, which can be updated here. All right, and you'll see this both on the roll-up as well as at the individual task level. And then, of course, there's also the option to access this from the task information dialog box. So you'll see in this case, task 4, 0% complete, and we can update that value here. All right. So this is the scheduling function. I would encourage you to take advantage of it, even if it's not for resource planning purposes. I think it's still fantastic for scheduling out activities, identifying the sequencing of activities, understanding any those relationships to executing on a particular project. The reason Tempus exists is in most cases this type of interface isn't the best for doing resource planning, but you can certainly introduce those folks that might need it for that purpose into your instance of Tempus. And then, of course, before I wrap up, I will also mention there is an Excel export here as well. It is focused on the task table. Obviously, Excel doesn't give us a good way to pop in Gantt displays, but that is here as well. And then, of course, to save your changes, you hit save and check in. So that's an overview of our scheduling function. Lots of new stuff coming soon in this area, more of it over time, and we would certainly welcome your feedback going forward. There's documentation agenda. There's physical documentation as well. And if you needed more of a one-on-one session with any member of the team, please feel free to reach out to us, Samantha, specifically to get you set up with the right people. So Samantha, that's all I've got.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, for that today. If you submitted a question, I'm going to go ahead and follow up with you after this webinar. So this afternoon, I will go ahead and do that. A few things I did want to mention. We do have 2 more webinars scheduled. We have the bulk project allocation functionality. We'll be going over both bulk project allocation and the flat grid on August 18th. The link to register for that is in the chat box. And then on August 26th, we will be covering our resource skills matrix, which is something that we released in 5.1. Sean will be hosting that one again, so we'll have him back on, and we'll be going over how to manage that and interact with that daily. And then also, Sean had mentioned this several times, but our Tempus Help Center is now live. I believe I sent an email to most of the admins, Tempus admins that we have. So go ahead and use that link to access that, and you can find all of the documentation there. This recording of this webinar will be there as well, probably within the next few days, so you can access that and share that with your team as needed. But that's about it today. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to kick this series back off and to get going on this again. So thank you so much. And Sean, thank you so much for hosting today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.